I spent 4 years saving for the perfect wedding, $60,000. Every nail I hammered, every hour I worked was for her. And on the day I was supposed to marry the love of my life, she disappeared. She ran away with our wedding photographer. But if she thought I'd stay silent, she didn't know who I really was. I grew up with calloused hands, rough from years of working construction. My father taught me early on that nothing comes easy. If you want something, you work for it, harder than the next guy. You don't complain, you just put your head down and grind. It's what I did. For as long as I could remember, I was swinging hammers and hauling lumber before the sun even rose, and I didn't mind. I knew that all the sweat, all the sore muscles, all the late nights would lead to something better one day. My mother always said that hard work pays off. That was all I had. My work and the quiet belief that one day I'd be able to offer someone more than a life full of dirty boots and dust. Then I met Jessica. She wasn't from around here. You could tell the moment she stepped into our little coastal town. She had that air about her. The one that made her stand out in a crowd, like a diamond in a pile of rocks. The first time I saw her, I was leaning against the counter of our usual diner, eating a greasy plate of eggs and bacon when she walked in. She looked like she belonged in a magazine ad, all pristine and polished, but it was her smile that got me. It was warm, genuine, the kind of smile that didn't feel rehearsed. My heart kicked up a beat. Now, I wasn't one for making moves, especially not on a woman like that, but I found myself smiling back, almost shyly. Something in her eyes told me she was open to conversation, and before I knew it, I was stumbling over my words, asking if she came here often. She chuckled, and that was the start of it all. Her name was Jessica. She had just moved to town for a new job at the local art gallery. Her laugh was like music, and she had that way of making everything feel easy, even for someone like me. I was used to being surrounded by men who didn't talk much, didn't share their feelings, who valued a good drink over a good conversation. But with Jessica, it was different. She wanted to know about me, my life, my work. For the first time, I felt like I didn't have to explain myself or prove anything. Our relationship grew quickly after that. She understood me in a way that no one else did. She respected the hard work I put into everything, and for once, I felt seen. I was proud of her too. She was smart and driven, and even though she came from a different world, one full of high society and art shows, I never felt like I was out of my league. She never made me feel like I wasn't enough. It wasn't long before we started talking about the future. The first time she mentioned marriage, it was in passing, as we sat on the porch of the little cottage I had bought after saving up for years. We had talked about everything else: dreams, family, kids. But when she asked me if I had ever thought about getting married, I froze. I'd never been the kind of guy who thought about a big wedding. I thought it was just something that happened if the time was right. But when she looked at me with those soft eyes, waiting for an answer, I knew I had to give her more than just promises. "I'll give you the wedding you deserve," I said, almost without thinking. And from that moment, that's exactly what I worked towards. I had no idea how I'd make it happen, but I had 4 years to figure it out. 4 years of early mornings and long days. 4 years of working overtime, saving every penny I could. I didn't go out, didn't spend on anything unnecessary. Every dollar went into a wedding fund I kept secret, tucked away in a bank account with just the words "For Jessica" written on a piece of paper in my desk drawer. I didn't mind the sacrifices. I wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it for her. Jessica, for her part, was perfect. She had this dreamy vision of what our wedding would be. Nothing too extravagant, just intimate, surrounded by the people who mattered. A ceremony on the beach, the wind in her hair, the sunset painting the sky. Simple, but beautiful. She picked out a dress that was all lace and silk, delicate and elegant. She smiled when she showed it to me, the kind of smile that made my heart swell. The day was going to be everything she dreamed of, and I was going to make sure it was everything I'd promised. And it was going to be a big deal. In our small coastal town, weddings were important. They weren't just a ceremony, they were a statement. They were a symbol of pride, of your place in the community. Everyone would be there: family, friends, old classmates, everyone. They would see us, they would see me, as a man who had worked hard for everything he had and who could finally provide for the woman he loved. The day of the wedding came. I was up before dawn, setting everything up with my best man, Daniel. The beach was perfect, as promised. The sky was clear, the water calm. The flowers had been arranged, the chairs set, the altar framed with white fabric swaying in the gentle breeze. My stomach churned with excitement and nerves, but I was ready. It was finally happening. The dream was finally coming true. But as I stood there waiting for Jessica, something didn't feel right. The minutes ticked by. The photographer, a guy named Brian who had come highly recommended, snapped a few photos of me, of the guests, but there was no sign of her. The sun was climbing higher, and the quiet whispers in the crowd began. I tried not to look, not to listen, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Something was off. She was supposed to be here. I checked my phone, but there were no messages, no calls, only silence. Then the coordinator came up to me, looking pale, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nick, she's gone. Jessica, she's gone." I froze, my heart dropping into my stomach. My body felt numb. I glanced at the crowd. The whispers grew louder, but I couldn't process it. I didn't want to. "Gone?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Yeah, she left, with the photographer." Her words hung in the air like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I stared at her, unable to understand. This wasn't possible. Not after all we'd been through. Not after everything I'd sacrificed. But there it was. The woman I had loved, the woman I had promised everything to, had just disappeared with the very person I had hired to capture our special day. The rest of the ceremony was a blur. I don't remember much of it, but I remember the eyes on me. I could feel the weight of every whisper, the judgment, the questions hanging in the air. How could she do this to me? How could she do this to us? As the sun sank lower in the sky, all I could do was stand there, feeling the weight of betrayal crash down on me. It felt like the entire town was watching, waiting for me to break, to fall apart. And in that moment, I realized that the wedding I had dreamed of, the life I had planned to her, it was gone. My heart, my pride, my trust, all of it shattered, and I had no idea how I would pick up the pieces. The days after the wedding felt like a haze. It was as if everything had turned grayscale, a world suddenly drained of color and meaning. People didn't know what to say to me, so they said nothing at all. Some tried to console me, but their words were hollow, meaningless. "She'll come back," they said. "She's just confused." But I knew better. I knew she wasn't coming back. The town was small and everyone talked. They whispered about the bride who ran off with the photographer. They talked about how I had been left standing alone, like a fool, while she was living out some wild fantasy with a man she'd only met a few weeks before. I could hear the gossip in the supermarket, the gas station, even at the diner where Jessica and I used to sit. People pitied me. But I didn't want their pity. I wanted answers. I spent the next few days hiding. I didn't go to work, didn't even go outside much. My phone rang constantly, but I ignored the calls. Jessica's family reached out, but I couldn't bring myself to speak to them. The only person who really tried to comfort me was my old friend Daniel. He was there for me when I needed to bury my face in a bottle of whiskey and scream, but even he couldn't fix what had been broken. He just listened. After a while, though, I couldn't hide anymore. The pain didn't fade, but I needed to do something. I needed answers, even if I wasn't sure I wanted them. So I started looking. It wasn't like I could go to the police or anyone else for help. There wasn't any crime here, at least not one they'd want to admit. But that didn't matter to me. The truth was what mattered. I began to check her social media accounts, something I'd avoided doing before. Jessica had always been so active online, posting about her life, her art, her dreams. It had been part of the charm. She had this online following, an influencer of sorts. But now I found myself scrolling through her posts with a different eye. Something wasn't right. There were the usual selfies, of course, the pictures of us at the beach, at family gatherings, at dinner parties. But something about her most recent posts felt off. There were a lot of pictures of her alone, but none of her with me. In fact, there hadn't been a single post about our wedding, not even a mention. The last photo of us together was taken weeks before the big day. I wondered if anyone else had noticed. But it wasn't just the posts. The messages. The messages were something else. I found a thread between her and Brian, the photographer, dating back months before the wedding. They had been communicating almost daily, chatting about everything from lighting for the wedding photos to personal things that made my skin crawl. I kept reading, the pit in my stomach growing heavier as I scrolled. "Can't wait to be with you on the big day, Jess," one of his messages read. "I have an idea for some special shots. Just you and me. Our secret." My heart stopped in my chest. I felt sick. This wasn't just some fling that happened on the day of the wedding. This was planned. The more I dug, the clearer it became. Jessica had been with him long before the wedding. She'd been leading me on, while secretly building some twisted connection with him behind my back. They'd been meeting up, sneaking around, making plans. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My mind raced. How long had they been doing this? Had I been blind to it all? I had to get more proof. I wasn't going to confront her yet, not until I had everything I needed. I started going through all the photos from the wedding day, the ones Brian had taken. At first, they seemed innocuous. Pictures of the guests, the setup, the ceremony. But I knew that's not what I was looking for. I dug deeper. As I went through the metadata of the photos, I found something that made my blood run cold. One of the last photos taken, the one right before the wedding was supposed to start, showed Jessica standing by the altar. But she wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking over her shoulder at someone behind her. I zoomed in on the background, and there he was, Brian, standing in the distance, hidden just out of frame, watching her. My hands shook as I clicked through more of the images. There were more moments, brief flashes, where Jessica's eyes flicked to him, or he was standing too close, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that was too familiar for a simple professional relationship. The final image was the one that made everything clear. It was a picture of the two of them walking away from the ceremony. The moment had been staged perfectly. Her veil was blowing in the wind, but her face, while soft, wasn't the face of a bride. It was the face of someone free, someone liberated. And there was Brian, walking right beside her, his arm just a little too close to hers. I had no choice now. The truth was right there, staring at me, and I couldn't look away. I couldn't pretend it wasn't real. But there was one more thing I had to do before I took action. I had to secure the evidence. I needed a professional. I called a lawyer I knew from a job site. He specialized in copyright law, and I had a hunch that this wasn't just about Jessica running away with the photographer. No, this was about something bigger. I knew I had the right to those wedding photos. I had paid for them, after all. But now I wasn't just going to keep them for myself. I was going to use them. He agreed to meet me the next day. I sat at the desk in my small, quiet apartment, my fingers gripping the edges of the papers I had printed out. All the screenshots, the photo metadata, the messages. I wasn't ready to confront Jessica, but I was ready to make sure she didn't get away with this. This was far from over. I didn't sleep much the night after I discovered the truth. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Jessica's face. Her smile, the way she'd looked at me before everything went wrong. I kept thinking about the life we were supposed to have, the house we'd talked about, the family we'd dreamed of. I felt like I was grieving a version of my life that had never existed. The next morning, I met with the lawyer, Sam. He was a tall, sharp man with a knack for making things clear, no matter how complex. I wasn't sure what I expected from him, but when I showed him the files, the messages, the metadata, the photos, he didn't bat an eye. "This is more than enough," he said, flipping through the printed copies I'd laid out. "You have a clear case for copyright infringement, and I'd say there's potential for defamation and emotional distress. We can go after him for damages if you want, or we can just focus on the photos themselves." "Just the photos," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I just want the world to know what happened." Sam nodded and typed a few things into his laptop. "You're in a unique position, Nick. These photos belong to you, and that means you can do with them as you wish. They've already been used for a lot of things. The wedding album, promotional stuff for her, but now you own them. We'll get a copyright claim on them and see if we can't make some noise about it. I lean forward, feeling a tightness in my chest. I want to release them. I don't want this to go quietly. I want the world to know what they did to me. Sam smiled, a knowing kind of smile. All right, we'll get started. I'll handle the legal side of things, but you've got to get ready for the backlash. This could get ugly. I wasn't afraid of ugly. After the meeting, I spent the rest of the day piecing together the timeline. Every message, every photo, every little breadcrumb they'd left behind. It all pointed to the same thing. Jessica had been planning this for months, and as I looked at the wedding photos, the ones she'd left behind, the ones I had paid for, I saw something that made my blood boil. The details of the day were all staged for their benefit, not mine. It wasn't just a betrayal of me, it was a betrayal of everything I stood for. I took the time to go through every single one of the photos again. But this time, I wasn't just looking at them. I was studying them, finding the little details that tied everything together. In one photo, Jessica and Brian were so close, it was as if they were already a couple. In another, they were laughing together, their eyes locked in a way I hadn't even noticed before. These weren't just wedding photos. These were love letters between two people who had planned everything from the start. And then I had an idea. I'd spent years working with my hands, building things from the ground up. I knew how to fix broken things, how to make them better than they were before. So I was going to fix this in a way that made sure I came out on top. I decided to take the photos, the very ones she thought she could use to build her own brand and story, and turn them into something else. I'd take her carefully curated love story and expose it for the fraud it was. I spent the next week getting everything in order. I contacted a digital artist I knew who specialized in NFTs, something I'd only vaguely heard about, but it felt like the perfect way to expose them. I could turn these photos into a public spectacle, a commentary on betrayal. I wasn't just going to release the photos as some kind of revenge. I was going to make them an object of culture, something that could not be ignored. And then it hit me, the $60,000 fraud. I wasn't just going to release these images. I was going to sell them. I created a series of NFTs from the wedding photos, each one carefully curated and titled to reflect the deception behind the scenes. I made sure the descriptions included details of how much I had paid, the lies Jessica had told, and the relationship they'd kept hidden. I made sure it was public, that the world would see exactly what happened. I wasn't just doing this to get revenge on Jessica and Brian. I was doing this to take back what was mine. I was doing this to make sure everyone knew that I wasn't some fool. By the time I was ready to release the NFTs, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I wasn't just reacting out of anger anymore. I was taking control. This wasn't about getting back at Jessica for her betrayal. It was about showing the world what happens when you mess with someone like me. I hit publish and waited. A few days later, everything exploded. The photos were everywhere. People started sharing them, commenting on them, laughing at them. The title, The $60,000 Fraud, made its rounds across social media. People were shocked. Some were disgusted, but most were just fascinated. Jessica's followers noticed the release. Fast. They quickly started questioning her, asking her about the photos and the story behind them. The questions piled up. The influencers who'd once praised her for her perfect life started distancing themselves from her. Her brand deals started to vanish. The sponsors she'd worked so hard to secure weren't returning her calls. She was losing everything. I didn't feel sorry for her. In fact, I felt a little proud, not just because she was being held accountable, but because I had created something out of nothing. Something that would stand the test of time. The photo series went viral. It became a symbol of betrayal, of the ugliness hidden behind the scenes of what seemed like a perfect life. People were reposting the images, talking about the emotional cost of deception. It wasn't just my story anymore. It had become everyone's story. But it wasn't over yet. I had one more thing to do. I started a YouTube channel called Red Hammer Truths. It was simple, raw, real. Each week I shared stories of betrayal, of people who'd been wronged, of the lies that people told to get ahead. It wasn't just about Jessica anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been lied to, about everyone who'd ever been taken for a fool. And slowly I began to heal. I was finding my voice again. And more importantly, I was finding my strength. I had my revenge. The photos had gone viral. The $60,000 fraud was everywhere. People were sharing them on Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, even in private forums. Bloggers wrote about it. News outlets picked up on the story. Jessica's world was crumbling, and I wasn't done yet. It wasn't just the photos that hurt her. It was the fact that she couldn't hide anymore. The world saw the truth. They saw her for what she was, a fraud, a liar, someone who had built a brand and a following on the back of someone else's heart. But it wasn't just her that I had to destroy. It was everything she stood for. Her perfect life, her fake marriage, her influencer persona. And I made sure to pull it all down. It wasn't enough to leave her broke, humiliated, and facing the destruction of her career. I had something bigger in mind. I had been thinking about it for days now, piecing together how to move forward, how to channel all the pain and betrayal into something that would serve me, something that would build a future. It wasn't just about punishing Jessica anymore. It was about building my own empire, one where I wasn't the victim, but the man who had risen from the ashes. That's when the idea came to me. Red Hammer Truths. At first it was just an outlet, a way to talk about what I had been through. But the more I shared, the more I realized how many people could relate. I wasn't the only one who had been lied to. I wasn't the only one who had been left broken, discarded, or betrayed. I had tapped into something far bigger than my own story. I had created a channel for those who had been wronged, for those who had a story to tell but didn't know how to start. And in doing that, I built a community. People started reaching out to me, telling me their own stories of betrayal, heartbreak, and revenge. They wanted to share, to heal, to feel heard. And I wasn't just telling their stories. I was teaching them how to take control of their own lives again, how to rise from the ashes of their own pain, just like I had. The channel started growing fast. I wasn't just getting views. I was getting engagement. People liked my raw, unapologetic style. They connected with my stories. My views went through the roof. Sponsors, real sponsors, not the fake glossy ones Jessica had gotten, started reaching out to me. People who wanted to work with me. People who wanted to hear more of the truth I was speaking. The money started rolling in. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to give me the financial freedom I had always dreamed of. Enough to pay off my debts, fix up my house, and start thinking about the future in ways I never had before. I hadn't just built a brand, I had built a voice. A few weeks after the NFT drop, I got an unexpected message. It was from an old friend, someone I hadn't talked to in years. His name was Dave, and we used to work together on construction jobs when I first started out. He had been a photographer on the side, but I hadn't seen him in a long time. The message was short, but it hit me hard. "Hey Nick, I saw what you did with the photos. You've got balls, you're changing the game. I have a feeling you're just getting started." It was a weird feeling, a sense of validation, like what I'd done wasn't just a petty act of revenge, but something bigger, something that meant something. I reached out to him and we set up a call. As it turns out, Dave had been building his own career as a content creator. He was in the early stages of starting a podcast about the dark side of social media, influencers, and the reality behind the filtered lives people put online. He asked me if I wanted to collaborate on an episode. "Absolutely," I said, a grin tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Let's show the world what happens when the perfect life comes crashing down." But things weren't all perfect. Even as I was gaining momentum, even as I was building something that made me proud, the past still lingered. Jessica, of course, tried to fight back. She went to the media, made up lies, and tried to claim that I was harassing her. But it was too late. The public had already made up their mind. She was a joke. The media didn't buy it, and neither did I. One afternoon, I found myself standing on the balcony of my house, looking out at the ocean, the same one I'd seen so many times before, the same one I'd stared at when I thought I was losing everything. Now it felt different. The sea was vast and endless, a reminder of how small my past really was. I had always thought I needed Jessica. I thought I needed her to make my life complete. But standing there, feeling the weight of everything I'd overcome, I realized how much stronger I was on my own. I didn't need her, I needed me, and I had me. By the time Red Hammer Truths hit its first million views, I knew I had made it. My channel was growing, my influence was expanding, and people were taking notice. The stories I was telling weren't just mine, they were everyone's. They were the stories of every man or woman who had been betrayed, overlooked, or mistreated. And they were starting to listen. I was starting to build something real, something meaningful. Jessica, on the other hand, was slowly fading into obscurity. Her influencer career was in shambles. She had lost her brand deals, her followers, and her reputation. She tried to salvage it, of course, but the damage was done. The world had seen her for who she truly was. I had become a symbol, not of vengeance, but of empowerment, of taking control of your life, no matter the circumstances. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the guy who came back from the brink, the guy who took the truth and turned it into a new life. And now, as I sat back in my new office, my phone ringing with calls from people who wanted to collaborate, work with me, or sponsor my next project, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Real peace. I wasn't just living anymore, I was thriving.